Good afternoon. Thank you. I hope you're having an amazing Cannes Lions. I know I am. My name's Michelle Zelli. I'm a human potentialist, a coach and a curator. I wasn't always all of those things. I was an abused child. I was an addict. I turned somehow or other my addictive energy into being a corporate success. And by the age of 40, I was managing director of the largest TV post-production house in the country, in the UK. And what that gave me was the responsibility for 50 creatives and 50 non-creatives. And what I realized was that creatives have a very different way of thinking, a way of being, and that if I could help them harness that right brain thinking, we could make some magic. Now, for 17 years, I've now been a coach. I coach discerning people from around the world. They're pretty successful already, and I coach them to have it all. I bring spirituality, psychology, and creativity together with amazing processes from around the world, and that's where curator comes in. And that's how I met Dr. James Hardt, because I am absolutely obsessed about human potential. So when I see something that looks extraordinary, I go and test it out for my clients, and I bring the best back to them. And so I myself have been into the brainwave chamber twice, once in Arizona with Dr. Hardt for 7 days. And as Tony Robbins said when he did his, it's one of the toughest things I've ever done in my life. It's also one of the most profound, which is why I was absolutely convinced I had to bring Dr. Hardt over from Arizona to Cannes to speak to you today. I'm no scientist, but I am very down to earth, and I'm very discerning. And I'm not about wasting anybody's time. I know how valuable your time is. But I truly believe that if you can harness your creative brainwaves, that you can unlock your creative genius. I've done a bit of that myself, because coaching needs to be creative. I need to keep my clients inspired, wired, and on their toes. But Dr. Hardt's going to give you some of the science behind it shortly. Later on in the session, there's going to be a Q&A. Ask anything to either of us. We really encourage that. So, unleashing your super creative brain. Your past does not define you. You know what? My story is no more important than yours. But so many of us get stuck into being defined by our history. Your history, your story, is your playground for growth. It becomes your greatness when we know how to harness ourselves, our brainwaves, and our genius. And it really is your brainwaves that make a difference. I'm going to leave it to Dr. Hardt to go through the different types of brainwaves. As I say, that's his expertise and not mine. But I would, as I say, like to formally introduce Dr. James V. Hardt, PhD. He's the CEO and founder of Biocybernaut. So, Dr. Hardt, why do you do what you do?
I'm very interested in sharing with everyone on this planet the ability to access the magnificence that is within their own brain. And so I believe together we're better and stronger. And so the more creative, the more intelligent, the more happy that each of us is, the more fulfilled lives we will be able to experience, and we will also be able to help others to be their best.
Thank you. How on earth did you get to create Biocybernaut, Dr. Hardt?
Briefly, I was a senior in physics at Carnegie Institute of Technology in the fall semester of my senior year. I came out of the lunchroom and there was a big hand-painted sign that said, Dr. Joe Camillo will speak on brainwaves and consciousness. And the time was 10 minutes away, the building was right over here, and I didn't have a class. So I went. And I was fascinated to learn that there was a science of brainwaves that could explain all philosophy, all psychology, and all mystical and transcendent experiences, because it turns out, as we'll see, brainwaves rule. So I spent every spare minute I had during my senior year as a physics major reading about brainwaves, the long history of brainwaves. And when I graduated in the spring, I got on my Triumph motorcycle and I rode from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania up into Canada and all the way to San Francisco, where I showed up at Joe Camilla's lab and volunteered as a research subject. And I had 3 sessions, very primitive technology then, but it was the most fascinating thing I'd ever done. So on day 4, I went back wanting more training. They weren't doing any studies that day. But Dr. Camilla's girlfriend, Joanne Gardner, worked in the lab, and she and I had become friends. And I asked her if she would put a few electrodes on me and put me in the chamber so I could play. And she did. Then she went upstairs, got involved in her work, forgot that I was there. Later, lunchtime came. She and 9 other members of the lab went out to lunch. And in course 11 of a 12-course Chinese lunch, she goes, oh my God, and she remembered. And so they all raced back across town, rushed into the building, opened the door, and interrupted the late stages of a most incredible adventure. Now, when I had gone into the chamber, I was a physics major, Protestant fundamentalist. I had no idea about altered states. I'd never even been drunk. And so in this time I was forgotten in the chamber, I had out-of-body experience, I was flying around the universe, I had ego disintegration, I met up with discorporate entities. It was a lot. But I was so high that my feet didn't touch the ground when I walked around for the next 3 days. And so I knew that this is something I had to do in my life. So I got back at the end of the summer, got back on my motorcycle, rode back across the country to Carnegie Mellon University, registered for psychology. I was going to get a PhD in psychology because I figured I needed to get my rational mind stamped with some seal of approval because I know I'd be dealing with very weird things. When Michelle did her training, she referred to it as psycho-spiritual rocket fuel.
Thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Dr. Hardt to introduce you to a very simple exercise to expand your conscious awareness right here and now. Are you up for that?
Yes.
Pardon?
Yes.
Yay! Dr. Hardt.
Okay, we're going to do a little exercise. So the first thing I would like you to do, as our person here, expand. Expand.
Standing or sitting?
It's however you feel.
Doesn't matter, whatever you like.
And then, when you feel expanded, settle back down. Sit in your chair. And now reflect inwardly. How do you feel? How are you feeling right now? What is happening in your thoughts? Are they racing? Are they buzzing? Are they languidly dripping along from one to another? What's going on? Just check in. So, the very next thing we're going to do is a couple of exercises to change your state, after which I'm going to ask you to do this check-in with yourself again to see if you can detect any differences. Now, when I spent all those thousands of hours in the library reading about brainwaves, I learned some things that ordinary people can do easily to somewhat increase their alpha brainwaves. So the first thing I want you to do when we begin, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, and before you do, I want you to bring your fingers to the bridge of your nose and very gently do like this. Okay? So when you're ready, close your eyes and bring your focus to where the touch of your fingers is on the bridge of your nose. And touch will enhance alpha. Having your eyes closed is a big boost for your alpha. And now I'm going to invite you to do slow, deep breathing while you continue touching the bridge of your nose gently. Slow, deep breathing. And so when you're ready, gently open your eyes, and the very first thing you do, check in with how are you feeling. How many people notice a difference in their state? Very good. Now, what we do in the brainwave feedback laboratory is we put gold disc electrodes on your head. We pick up the very tiny, just a few millionths of a volt brainwaves, boost them 100,000 times bigger so the computers can read them, and then we do spectral decomposition. It's like when you pass a light through a prism, breaks it down into the rainbow of colors. We take each channel of brainwaves and break it down into the spectrum: delta, theta, alpha, Schumann, beta, gamma. And so we go back to Michelle.
Thank you, Dr. Hardt, and thank you everybody for giving yourself that calibration moment. And that's something I really encourage you to do as creatives. You're busy, you're under pressure, you put yourself under enormous pressure too. But when you learn to calibrate how you're feeling, how you're thinking, and your energy, you start to take a new level of control. You're going to learn much more about how to induce your alpha brainwaves and why you'd want to, and there's going to be my own before, after, and then my second laboratory brainwave charts up on the screen. This was my day 2. It won't mean anything to you at this stage. But what I can tell you is there are certain things that will kill your alpha brainwaves, and your alpha brainwaves, I'll say it again, they are your creative genius. Dr. Hardt's going to go through the different types of brainwaves, but for now, just trust me that alpha is where you want to be at. So let's talk about how you can kill your alpha, should you not want to be creative, should you not want brilliant new solutions for old problems. Distractions. So when you're in creative mode, turn off your email, turn off your phone, give yourself a set period of time undistracted. We've got so hooked into needing to be available 24/7. I can't begin to tell you the power of just giving yourself that space. Even if it's 30 minutes, just test it out. By the way, I'd like to say to you, please don't believe a word I say, not a word. I'm here to give you concepts to try out for yourself, and the evidence will be for you to make your own decisions. Caffeine. Look, I'm Italian, I love coffee. This was the worst news of ever. You know, caffeine absolutely kills your brainwaves. Now, I wasn't too sure about this and I didn't want to believe it. So one of the days before I went into the chamber, the brainwave chamber, I actually had coffee because I have to see things for myself, and it did. I absolutely flatlined. So what I do is, if I'm going to have a naughty day and I'm not needing my creative brainwaves, I do most of these in one go. Because, listen, I do, it works, you know. But if I know that I've got to be on my creative best game, I knock out all of these things, okay? So I have a saintly day where I'm a creative genius, and then I have a devil day when I'm not. So, garlic and onions. Can you believe that? Garlic and onions are absolute devil's food for creatives. Again, I can tell you hand on heart, I tried it, I tested it, I just didn't take Dr. Hardt's word for it, I flatlined. Processed food, we all know that's a no-no anyway. Tobacco, alcohol, recce, drugs, stress. What do you do when you need to be your creative genius best? You put yourself under stress. I've got to do it. You give yourself this immense pressure. It's actually the worst thing you can do. The best thing you can do is to allow yourself to connect with universal flow. That comes from up here. You breathe in, you close your eyes, and you allow yourself to accept what comes. That sounds really voodoo, Lala. I get that. Please try it. Take the pressure off yourself, stay away from these no-nos, and just connect with your creative flow. You will be absolutely astounded what happens. Perfectionism, we all know that is the highest form of self-abuse, don't we? And creatives can't afford to be perfectionists because a creative process, it never ends. It's never ever going to be the final article. So for any of you, by the way, that have got Netflix, there is an amazing documentary, Dr. Dre, and it is called The Defiant Ones. If you haven't seen it, it's probably the best TV I've ever seen on creative genius. The Defiant Ones, it's 4 series. You don't need to love hip-hop, but it helps if you do. It's got all of the old school guys on there, Eminem and Easy, yes, thank you. But really worth you tuning in. It shows you this stuff in Technicolor. And finally, imposter syndrome. 83% of executives report that they wake up most mornings thinking this is the day they're going to be found out. So we all do it, you know, and I actually think the other 17% are telling fibs. You know, as I said, I work with the heads of most of the music companies, a lot of the finance companies, on a one-to-one private basis, and I can tell you now the insecurity is phenomenal the higher that I think you get up the food chain. But it really hurts your brain waves. So, how our brain creates our reality using evidence. Every time you tell yourself something, you are reinforcing it to be true. So please listen to your self-talk. You have 60 to 100,000 thoughts a day. 60 to 100,000 thoughts a day. How many of those are positive, nurturing, nourishing? And how many of those are destructive and self-abusing? Most of us haven't got the ideal ratio, but you can practice. Your brain is, it loves habit, and you can fake it till you make it. You really can. So when you find yourself saying something that's not positive and in line with who you want to be, just say to yourself, that's not who I am anymore, and change it. Don't beat yourself up, because that's counterproductive. So I'm going to give you a very, very quick scoop on how your brain does this. Your brain deletes, distorts, and generalizes. So I'm going to ask you to do a really quick and dirty exercise with me right now. I'm going to ask you to look around the room when I say go, okay? Now, when I say go, here we go, ready, go. And I want you to look for everything that is red. Everything that is red. Look, 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 look. Red, 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 red. Close your eyes. What did you see that was grey? Yeah. Okay, open your eyes. There's loads of grey. I chose grey because the whole bloody room is grey, right? Now, what your brain did then, your brain is 3 pounds of sensational, goal-orientated cells. There is nothing as complex as your brain in the whole universe. And what you just did is you programmed your brain to go and find red. So it deleted everything that wasn't red for you. So you imagine you wake up in the morning and you say, I'm stressed, I can't do this project is just going to kill me. Because we do that, don't we? What do you think your brain is going to delete and distort? It's going to delete, distort all of your creative genius and all of the moments and all of the inspiration that you need most. What you tell yourself you truly do become. I know that was a really quick and dirty exercise, but I hope it gave you a little bit of punch for your buck here on how powerful your focus genuinely is. Whatever you focus on, you get more of for that specific reason. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Thank you. Fantastic. The power of intention. For those of you that like a bit of spiritual with your creativity, please check out Dr. Wayne Dyer. My business, Making the Shift, is named after his book. He's quite an extraordinary guy, and he talks very much about the power of intention. Now, going along with your brain and what you focus on, you get more of. When you set an intention, your brain goes out of its way to reinforce it, to find it. I teach my clients, and to start off with they're resistant, but they soon come into line, that every morning we set an intention. Today I intend to relax. What a great intention. Today I intend to connect from the heart. Today I intend to deliver a dynamic workshop on brainwaves. Your intention's your business, but the power of it is phenomenal. Before you go into a meeting, before you start a presentation, set that intention. You don't need even to speak it out loud. Set it internally, and again, let me know of the magic that comes. So I'm now going to hand over to our genius doctor here, who's going to talk to you about brainwaves and why they rule. Dr. Hardt.
Thank you, Michelle. Yes.
Thank you.
Brainwaves rule. It's an interesting concept. What I'm going to talk to you about today is not theory, it's not philosophy, it's scientific fact. Hear my voice. I will tell you about the brainwaves of creativity. Michelle has told you that at one point she directed 50 creative people and 50 not creative people. It turns out that we've studied these in the lab. If you bring creative people and non-creative people into the brainwave lab, you sit them down, put electrodes on their head, one of the things that Miguel is very good at doing, and then you measure their brainwaves. At rest, there is no difference between ordinary people and creative people. However, when you give people problems to work on, the normals sit there in their normal brainwave state and do only as well as normals usually do in solving creative problems, whereas the creative people immediately go into a high alpha state, and within this high state of alpha brainwaves, they quickly and effectively solve the problems in a manner that distinguishes them as creative people. You may all know the famous Einstein quote where he said, "Problems cannot be solved at the level of awareness where they were created." And so, if you have the ability to turn on a different brainwave state, a high alpha state, you can quickly and effectively solve problems that were impossible before. At one point, at my training center then in California, I trained scientists from Stanford Research Institute. Their bread and butter is creativity. Their average creativity increase was 50% in a week. Many of them solved problems that had stumped them, that were insoluble, for over 2 years. You go into an alpha state, you have all the data, you know what the problem is, but you just haven't put it together in the way that your brain can put things together when you are in an alpha state. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the alpha state, but the main idea here is that your brainwaves rule. Now, we see a 50% increase in creativity from 1 week of the alpha training at Biocybernaut. Here's a scientific reference. This is a published, peer-reviewed scientific paper. You will be able to get copies of this presentation, and you'll be able to look up each one of the presentations here, the scientific presentations. Now, here we're going to look at some brainwaves. This is before training, this is after training. Before training, after training, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist to see that they are different. When we start, we have here a 74-year-old depressed woman. First name is Dorothy. At the end of the week, she looks like this, and she has become a creative landscape painter. She'd never painted before in her life. And yet, after 7 days of alpha training, this latent ability emerges. Also, there are, as another side effect of the alpha training, is an increase in your intelligence. The IQ goes up 11.7 points. And it doesn't matter if you're a dummy or a genius, because the training helps everyone. There's no correlation with the starting IQ in terms of the increase. And we've tested, there's no diminution, no reduction of this IQ boost even a year later. So this becomes something that is a part of you. Your brain simply works better. And also, here's EQ, or emotional intelligence. Let's take a moment to talk about emotional intelligence. It turns out that IQ only accounts for 10, maybe 20% of your success in life. You might be a genius, but if you can't get along with other people, you're probably not going to be successful. EQ, or emotional intelligence, accounts for 60% of success in life. And the beautiful thing is that EQ is studied all over the world, and it has been shown that a 1-point increase in emotional intelligence raises a person's income $1,300 per year. Now that's an average that includes Bangladesh and Pakistan and Myanmar, and as well as advanced countries. And so in advanced countries, you're likely to do better. And with this increase, 15.8 points in a week, that amounts to an average of over $20,000 more that people would make after doing a 1-week training. And so we also have, we're going to look at this again, very powerful. There's the before and the after for the brainwaves. And again, brainwaves rule. Here are some of the brainwaves. The slowest ones are delta, 0 to 4 cycles per second. Theta is faster, 4 to 7. Alpha is 8 to 13. That's what we primarily start people out with the training. Beta waves are 13 to 30, and they're associated with stress, anxiety, anger, and gamma waves go up to about 100 hertz. Brainwaves rule. They rule your emotions, your thoughts, your feelings, your perceptions. Your brainwaves rule your life. And when you cannot voluntarily control your brainwaves, you're like the bound and gagged captive in the trunk of the car of your life as it hurtles through life. But when you can control your own brainwaves, the shackles come off, the handcuffs fall away, the blindfold comes off, and you are now in the driver's seat of your life, able to do what you want effectively, easily, and creatively. Now, we had shown you several slides that said brainwaves rule. That's the colloquial way to say it. There is a scientific way to say it. We call it the psychophysiological principle. And the way it says is any experience you have as a living human being, you have that experience only when you have the appropriate underlying pattern of brainwaves. If you change your brainwaves, you change your experiences, and you also change fundamentally who you are at an identity level. At one point I entertained Robert Dilts, one of the second-tier luminaries of neuro-linguistic programming at my laboratory. And he had just written a book called Changing Beliefs. And he said, with NLP, you can change beliefs and behaviors and everything all the way down. And I said, Robert, that's wonderful. And with the brainwave training, you can change at a level of identity. And he goes, oh my God. He said, the only thing I know that can change someone at a level of identity is a spiritual awakening. Okay, so Michelle called this psycho-spiritual rocket fuel. And it turns out advanced meditators have much more alpha. We'll look at that in a minute. But changing identity, that's the essence of transformation. Now, in logic and rhetoric, there's a simple way to test the truthfulness of a proposition. It's called reductio ad absurdum, Latin. Reduce it to the absurd. So if I'm saying that your brainwaves determine your experiences, well, what would be the extreme? Well, flatline. no brainwaves. That turns out to be the medical definition of death. So if you have no brainwaves, you have no experiences. If you have brainwaves, then you have experiences which are enabled, empowered by those brainwaves. You change your brainwaves, you have different experiences. Brainwaves rule. They rule all of your experiences, they rule all your skills, and they rule all of your creativity. Now here is Michelle. This is time, these are alpha waves, and this is day 1 of her alpha training. Now, here's day 7 of her alpha training, which was November last year in Sedona, Arizona. And so notice that there are gaps. She has great alpha, but it's not consistent. There are gaps where the alpha's not there. 7 days later, not only does she go higher, but she's much more consistent. So she can be creative kind of on demand. I know, I remember working with a painter, and when he would get into writer's block, he would do house cleaning. He would try to meditate. He would try to change his state to get rid of the stress that was blocking. Well, all you have to do is turn on your alpha, and then your brain is going to work creatively. Now, when Michelle came to Germany in April, over Easter, here we see, now these are the 2-minute scores, and this was day 1, and this is day 4 of her tune-up. And as you can see, she increased significantly further than from where she was at the beginning. Summarizing, the increase in creativity is 50% from 7 long days, 7 consecutive days of alpha training. The increase in IQ is 11.7 points, and emotional intelligence goes up 15.8 points. Now here's a fun story. There was a famous Mexican architect, Arquitecto Jesus Cervantes. He's created a company called Luminacret, which has produced a new form of concrete. It's 40% cheaper, it's lighter, it's stronger, it doesn't need rebar, it has nanofibers in it. And he came for alpha training last year. And in his alpha training, he completely designed the factory in order to make this. His creativity had produced the substance, but he didn't know how to make it. And so he actually designed all of the machines and where they were located and designed a complete factory. Now it turns out that I've studied Zen meditation. There is embedded in the PowerPoint PDF documents, so when you get a copy of it, you'll be able to read these. This one was done by 2 famous Japanese scientists, Kasamatsu and Harai. And they wanted to study the brainwaves of Zen monks in Japan. So they went to Zen masters of 2, like in Christianity, there's Protestant and Catholic. In Zen, there's 2 branches, Soto and Rinzai. And so they went to Zen masters in both of these Zen traditions and requested permission to measure the brainwaves during Zazen meditation. Permission granted. But then they further asked the Zen masters to rate the monks for level of spiritual development. And they did, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Then they measured the brainwaves. And what they found were major differences in the brainwaves, whether they were beginners, intermediate, or advanced. And nobody was rated advanced who had less than 21 years of practice. So in Zen, the fastest you can get to advanced is 21 years. Well, in 1993, I published a paper showing that 7 days of this alpha training allows you to install exactly the same brainwaves as if you were doing Zen for 21 to 40 years. We know that technology speeds things up, and so you have the opportunity to change your brainwaves very quickly. Now, some of you may have heard of the advanced spiritual state of Kundalini. This is the brainwaves of Kundalini. These are 1 second intervals, so we're talking about very slow frequencies here. This is also trainable. Here is theta. These are theta brainwaves. Now, it turns out that with theta, you can access the Akashic Records, which is an energetic database of all knowledge that was, is, and ever will be. And so this actually constitutes a second type of creativity. Now, so that this doesn't sound like New Age mumbo jumbo, let me give you an example of a creative scientist that you probably all know. He invented the electric light bulb. His name is Thomas Alva Edison. And he had a strategy of only sleeping 4 hours a night in 2 different periods. So he was really tired every day. And he would lie down in a recliner chair, holding in each hand a large steel ball bearing with a metal pan underneath. And while leaning back in the chair and trying to fall asleep, he would be thinking of something he wanted to invent. And of course, when he hits sleep, he loses his grip. The steel ball bearings fall, wake him up. He takes a pen and he writes down whatever little piece of that idea he got. Then he recollect the balls, lie back in the chair, and go again. And so theta brainwaves allow you to pull in information to solve a problem that's not known to you. It's in the Akashic records, but it's not known to you. It may not be known to any human in your time period. You might want to check out Kekule's discovery of the benzene ring. In the late 1800s, benzene had become an important industrial chemical. Kekule was a Flemish scientist, and he became obsessed. Worked late at the lab, took the last tram home, had dinner, drowsed in front of the fire, and he began seeing little furry balls moving around in the fire. Fascinating. As fun as television, right? And so over weeks, the little furry balls would sometimes bump into each other, and they formed chains which would undulate through the fire. And one night, the undulating chains got frisky and they were playing crack the whip, and the ends of one of the chains spun around and stuck, making a ring structure. And he knew immediately that was a structure of benzene, and he counted the balls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Formula for benzene is C6H12. But it's in a ring. And nowadays, we can use an electron microscope and we can visualize atoms, but back in the 1800s, there was no electron microscope, but Kekule was pulling out of the Akashic records what he needed to know about the shape and structure of atoms in order to solve the problem, so then they could synthesize benzene. So we have 2 types of creativity, both rare, both wonderful. There's the alpha creativity, in which you can novelly assemble data that you previously learned, but maybe forgot, but it's in your brain. In alpha, you can pull all those pieces together and solve the creative problem. But if to solve your problem, you need information that's not known to you, then you go into theta brainwaves, and you can pull the information out of the Akashic records. Michelle?
Can I just ask you, thank you, Dr. Hardt. In fact, I know the answer, so I'm going to be brave and I'm going to take that spot. So one of the things that Dr. Hardt has talked about there is when you go to sleep, you nod off. If you set yourself a problem you want to solve, you get a download of creative wisdom in what's called a hypnagogic state. Anybody heard of hypnagogic? It's a lovely word, hypnagogic. Okay, so your hypnagogic state is the tiny little window between sleep and awake. Okay, so you remember Dr. Hardt was saying about that Edison would put those ball bearings and fall asleep, and then he would wake up and he'd write down the solution. It's because in that moment he was in his hypnagogic state. So one of the key tricks that I've learned since being in the chamber is that if I set myself a clear intention of something that I need to solve, it'll often be with a tricky client situation, kaboom, and I can literally wake up and immediately put a notepad in that moment. So it's not a case of wake up, check your phone and then do it. It's literally when you are in that hypnagogic, that little window between sleep and wakefulness, okay? So please do, anything that you are loving right now, any little snippets, please do pop them out on a conversation on Twitter, on Instagram. As I say, I'm just a coach. I used to be the head of sales for Centrica. I've got a corporate background, I've got a creative background, and as I say, I'm really obsessed by psychology, spirituality, and getting our emotions in line. Because for most of us, particularly creatives who are high right brain, we allow our emotions to run our life. If I'm angry, if I'm sad, if I'm in shame, shame's still the unspoken emotion that does a lot of damage. What we're saying is that if you are able to have the presence of mind and set the intention to take control of your emotions, don't let your emotions rule you anymore. They're really important signposts, Anger, what is the purpose of anger? It's letting you know you're not getting your needs met. Every time you get angry, just check back. Where am I not getting my needs met? It will change your experience. It's also saying to you, how am I expressing what my needs are? Because often we don't get our needs met, not because the other person's a bad person, but because we haven't told them what we need. And there's a difference between needs and wants. I believe the universe always gives you what you need, not necessarily what you want. But if you look back over your history, how often what you really wanted, are you so damn glad you didn't get it? Now, at the time, it broke your heart. Whether it was a date with the hot guy or girl or whatever it was, or a new house or a new car, it doesn't matter. Go back over your timeline to prove this to yourself, because then your wants are going to become more in line with who you want to be. We've talked about identity. Identity is who I believe I am. When we change our identity, we change how we believe we need to express ourselves to the world. We change our interaction with people mindfully because we select who we want to be. So many of us are brought up to think, well, my dad, he's nearly 80 now, and he'll say to me, well, that's just who I am. Well, no, it's actually who you're choosing to be. And we have that power. And I want you to breathe in that power. I want you to really feel that power that you've got right now. By using your brainwaves, by using your intentions, by using your energy, your focus, and pulling it in, I'm going to say it again, from the universe, whether you believe in God or a cat on the moon, there is an intelligent force, an intelligent power that is way, way, way more than we could even imagine. And what I'm asking you to do today is to suspend any disbelief you might have and just open your mind to the power of that in conjunction with utilizing that amazing 3 pound of technology in here. How does that sound? Do you fancy having a little go at that? I mean, would you open yourself up to something new? Yeah? Fantastic. So what I want to ask you right now is, how will you do that? Because I know that you have been absolutely an information central. Cannes Lions, this is my first Cannes Lions, and the amount of information and knowledge that has come my way has been extraordinary. I was lucky enough to MC on Monday and Tuesday at the Health Inspiration stage, and I learned so much. The problem is that there's so much information coming to us. Some of you probably already know that there is the same amount of information comes to us in one 24-hour period as in a lifetime in the Victorian era. Just take a moment to absorb that. And we wonder why we're stressed, why we're wired, why we're anxious. Information is energy, and it's coming at us. And we've got an expectation that we need to do something with it. So if you think about it, that we've got more information coming at us in 24 hours than they did in a lifetime in the Victorian era, how do you know which information to turn into knowledge? And knowledge is information that you use practically. So I'm going to go back to set that intention. When you're looking at Facebook or scrolling through Instagram or whatever your gig is, or it might be the BBC News or Vice, or doesn't matter. Set an intention. How am I going to use this piece of information? Because that way you are consciously turning the overload of information into key knowledge in line with your dreams, your goals, and the identity that you wish to have. Does that make sense? Everybody with me? Anyone with me? Yeah. Thank you. Now, between us, we've got a huge amount of knowledge and information. You can see quite clearly that we're very, very different. I didn't get sponsored to have a very good education. I was pretty feral as a kid, as I say. It was an abusive childhood. I was adopted. My mum was a Playboy bunny mother. My dad was a prize fighter. So I come from quite some genes. And then I got adopted into a very abusive system. So I didn't get an education, but what that did give me was real life experience. And so what I am, if you like, is I am the apprentice with the sorcerer, because Dr. Hardt is an academic of the highest level, which I'm not. But between us, we've got pretty much every area covered. So whatever it is you want to know about the mind, your brain, because they're not quite the same thing, about your conscious awareness, about your outcomes, your creativity, your genius, your spirituality, your connection, I think we could cover it. So please, do let us know. Have you got any questions at this stage? Who's got a question for us? Yeah, hi.
Hi. I have a lot of questions. I'm a bit confused.
Okay.
So, first of all, I'm curious about how do you measure the EQ, emotional intelligence, after the tests? This is the first question. The second one is, okay, we get that the garlic is our enemy. So, and alcohol and other stuff that was written down on the list. But I'm really interested in, do you have some specific step-by-step guide? How can we train our creative mind, and or is it just through a procedure with brainwaves? Okay, thank you. Thank you for.
Very good question. It turns out that when the alpha goes up, by whatever means, you will become more creative, because the brain in that state is more creative. Now, there are a number of things that you do in life that will increase your alpha a little. For example, closing your eyes, having pleasant touch. Orgasm increases alpha briefly, but enormously. And so there are many things, meditation, if you do it right, if you persist, that will also increase your alpha. Although, when I studied Zen monks, I remember working with one man. He was a 10-year veteran of Zen. He was like fanatical about it. I visited his home, and it was in the Santa Cruz Mountains of California. And there was a big sign over the entry that said, "In trance." And then there were little Zen gardens and little Zen ponds and little Zen bridges. But when he sat down to meditate, what little bit of alpha he had went away. It's called trying. And so it's not practice that makes perfect. It's correct practice. And so it turns out that the pacemakers for alpha are located in a structure which is about at the intersection of these lines. It's called the thalamus. There's a left and a right half of the thalamus. Some people, brain scientists, call it the brain within the brain because it's so complex. And it has pacemaker cells, which project to the surface, always urging the brain, be in alpha, be in alpha. But what Shakespeare might call the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or you might call the stress of daily life, gets in the way and interrupts those flows. And so in meditation, you go to a quiet place, you close your eyes, you try to let thoughts go, in the hope that the generator in the thalamus will send alpha waves to your head in a way that they can be coherent and grow bigger. That works for some people, but it takes decades. And so what we do with the technology, if we put electrodes on the head, you can detect the alpha waves, and there may be 5 microvolts, 10 microvolts. In an advanced Zen, it might be 50 microvolts. Zen master might have 100 microvolts, but they're tiny signals. The muscles produce millivolts, 1,000 to 10,000 times bigger. And so when you are doing the alpha training, the technology picks up the alpha, we turn it into sound. So we have, in the alpha 1 training, we have like 4 sounds. Boom, 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 boom. So different head sites, the sounds are different, and you hear your brain. in flutes and oboes and violins and saxophones. And when the alpha at a particular place gets bigger, that musical instrument gets louder. And so that's feedback. Like if you want to shoot a basketball, you throw it and it misses. That's feedback. So you throw it slightly differently, and maybe it doesn't miss by as much, and that's feedback. And so you adjust. And so the brain is an incredible device for learning. But what it needs is feedback that's accurate, immediate, and reasonably aesthetic. And when people have instructions to make the tones louder, they can accomplish, because they sit in a quiet, dark room to do this, they can produce in 7 days the same brainwaves that would take you 21 to 40 years if you were doing Zen meditation. I trained a Zen master one time. He had a big temple in Japan, 150 students, and he came to my California center. And he was funny. At one point in his first session, he's reporting. He goes, "Oh, I was making alpha. Oh, I was making lots alpha. Oh, maybe I'm a great Zen master. Oh, all alpha come down." So when he went into ego and pride, his alpha went away. At the end of his training, he said, "Biocybernaut better than having own Zen master." And I go, "Ruho, how can you say that? You're a Zen master." He goes, "Look, if you have Zen master busy. Have 100 student. You sit, you meditate, you have attainment. Master busy, not notice. Next day, master see you different. He give you feedback. One eyebrow go up a little. At Biocybernaut, feedback all the time. Biocybernaut better than having on Zen master." From the mouth of Ruho Yamada Roshi, a Zen master.
Thank you, Dr. Hardt. And from a coaching perspective, I'd like to answer that question as well. As I say, I work with a lot of creatives, and their commerce is very important to the creatives I work with. And so I did a study of my favourite creatives, and that was from Coco Chanel through to Eminem, who we've got him again, Dr. Dre, my personal hero, right through to Steve Jobs, Bruce Springsteen, and there were 20 of them. And what I was looking for was the difference that makes the difference. What is it that all of these people had in common? Anybody want to guess what they've all got in common? Anybody got a clue? Come on, somebody brave enough to put your hand up.
Hard childhood.
A what?
Hard childhood.
Say it again.
Hard childhood.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Every single one of them had emotional dysfunction in their childhood. So I said at the beginning of this presentation, your past does not define you. Your past is your playground for learning. And when I went through those 20 people, and I was really meticulous, once I get my teeth into something, I'm like a dog with a bone. And that was the one thing that stood out. There was adoption, there was abandonment, there was abuse, there was emotion. They were not getting their emotional needs met. So I said to myself, well, okay, so how on earth does that create these creative geniuses? Well, what happens is that, this is certainly something I see in myself and something I see in clients. When we have emotional dysfunction, we rely on intensity to not feel the emotions we don't want to feel. Is that making any sense? Intensity is extremes. I am one of the most extreme bunnies you're ever going to meet, and I've spent most of the last 20 years moderating that. But I also channel it, and what I realized with my clients was, who are mostly intensity junkies, they're very successful. What is intensity? Intensity means I've got a powerful force of energy that if I was to direct it is phenomenal. So those of you here, and there will be plenty of you because you're at Cannes Lions, who are intensity junkies. Now when I say intensity junkies, another way that you might know it is you're all or nothing. Does that familiar with anybody? Yeah. Oh yeah, I can see some heads nodding now. Okay, now you all or nothing people, you are geniuses in the making. You just haven't channeled it yet perhaps. And maybe you have. Maybe you already know you're a genius. So when you've got that need for all or nothing, imagine channeling that into the vision of the best version of you. Who do you want to be? Who do you really want to be? Sit down, write a list of the traits that you want to own. There are 4,638 human traits. Did you know that? No? I haven't actually counted them, but I had that from Dr. John D. Martini, who apparently has. And that's according to the Oxford Dictionary. So if you take those 4,600 human traits, you have every single one of them. Every single one of them. Now, then you'll say to me, well, Michelle, I don't want all of those traits because some of those traits are not good traits. So tell me a trait that might not be good. Anybody got an idea or a trait you think isn't good? Jealousy. Yeah, well, okay, so when is jealousy a good trait? You're absolutely right. Most of us would say it isn't. How can I turn jealousy into a good trait? When is it positive?
Trust.
When it's trust. So it's certainly highlighting that I've got trust issues and that I need to work on those. So every trigger that you have, triggers are not bad things, guys. Triggers are amazing things. They're bringing the shit from here, they're bringing it up so that you can work on it, okay? But jealousy, how about if you channel jealousy into something that is motivating you to be better and more beautiful and more incredible? Now here's the trick, you put your blinkers on. Okay? Anybody know who Jimmy Iovine is? Yeah, well, he's one of the most incredible music producers ever. Everybody from Stevie Nicks to Snoop Dogg, right? I mean, just incredible guy. Check him out if you don't know him. Now, what he says is in order to be a genius, he had to put his blinkers on like a racehorse. Because if you look over to the next lane, what's going to happen? You're going to get flattered. You're not paying attention. So one of the things I want you to do when you channel your creative genius, I want you to stay in your own lane and you keep your lane tidy and clean. It doesn't matter what they're doing over there because they are not you and they do not have the same qualities, the same aptitude for genius. So if we are all plugging into our uniqueness, we are all capable of genius. But what we tend to do is we tend to want to be good at a lot of things. And we waste a lot of time, energy, and focus on trying to be good at stuff that we're not naturally good at. I cannot park a car for love nor money. It's embarrassing. My neighbours actually think it's the entertainment for the day, right? However, I can spot potential in somebody at 500 yards. I can spot the block and I can help them dissolve it. I'm hopeless when it comes to anything practical around the house. I can't cook, I can't sew, but I'm a dog whisperer. You give me any kind of dog and I can have it trained in 2 seconds with kindness. So I'm not telling you any of that to impress you, but as an example of the reason I am so good at what I do is because I've kept my blinkers on. And I laugh at myself not being able to park and tripping up down the road and I can't cook and can't sew. It doesn't matter. Because what's really important to me, what really is going to change the world, and I do, for me it's person by person and a ripple effect, is simply by focusing on what I was naturally good at. Okay, and you know, of course, with my background, I spent 40 years making mistakes. So boy, oh boy, oh boy, do I know about things from every angle. And I've used that. So if you're tempted to think that you've got to be good at everything, stop it, please. That's so much pressure for you. You know, some people say, oh, I can't do that, Shell, I'm dyslexic, or I'm not good with figures, or I'm not very good at painting. Great, you know that about yourself. So now tell me what you are good at. Let's just ignore all the rest of it. There's plenty of people who are good at that other stuff. Let's find your genius and turn it up. Does that make sense? Because if you keep on focusing on what you're good at and you keep on plugging into that energy of, wow, I'm good at that, I'm good at that, guess what happens? You start to walk like you're good at that. You start to talk like you're good at that. You start to convey to the world, your human expression is, I am really good at that. And when you have that kind of output, people sit up and listen. When you've ever connected with a genius, and I call somebody a genius who's extraordinary in their field, they're single-minded. They've got blinkers on. They do not give a monkey's uncle about what's going on over there, do they? They're literally in their own lane. So please, really look at that today. And as I say, you get so much information. Turn some of this to knowledge. When you get outside there today, how are you going to choose which lane to be in? How are you going to choose where your area of genius is? And as Dr. Hardt has so eloquently explained, your alpha brainwaves are a huge part of your creative genius. So when you've got a really hot, pressurized project, stay off the garlic, stay off the fags, stay off the booze and anything else that you might be tempted. It really does make a difference. Stay out of pressure and watch what you're telling yourself. Tell yourself, I've got this. I am going to channel my creative genius. That's all I need to do, and I'm going to breathe it into every cell of my being. Sounds woo-woo, but it's incredibly powerful. So that was my answer to your question. Is that all right?
Yeah, this was pretty good answer.
Thank you. Who else has got a question? Yes, please.
What do you think of the Muse headsets and the kinds of
Like the Muse headsets.
Yeah, they measure alpha and gamma brainwaves.
Yeah, Dr. Hardt headsets, please.
What's the question again?
Are you aware of like the Muse headsets?
I am. I consider the Muse to be a toy,
It's a toy.
not a scientific instrument. We build all of our own technology because it's impossible to buy things of the accuracy and the quality that we require. I'm a recovered perfectionist, and like Michelle said earlier, if you're creative, you're never done. There's always further improvements that you can make. At one point I designed a headset that could be worn. It had 4 different sizes and cost $500 for people to bend it and put on the electrodes. But it only recorded from a limited number of sites on the head. So what we use is a much older technology, which are the grass gold disc electrodes. They're little gold electrodes with 48-inch wires. And they're put on, for example, Miguel will put them on with water-soluble gels and paste. And you can walk around for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours and you don't feel them. At the end of the day, the electrodes are easily removed. You shower, wash your hair, and I've actually experienced that the paste creates a little more body to my hair. This way, you don't have a headset, and you can put electrodes anywhere you need to. And so we find it's, at some point, maybe somebody will have a dry, maybe even a non-contact electrode, and we will adopt that. But for now, the accuracy and the comfort is so important. Some people use a woman's bathing cap with little holes in it, and they put electrodes on, but the pressure of that plastic squeezing the head, many people get a headache in a half an hour, and our sessions last all day. So we use gold disc electrodes, simpler.
Thank you. There's a lot of there are headsets on the market, as you know. Muse is one of them. In my experience, myself and with clients, we've not really seen any great improvements. I wouldn't encourage you at this stage to spend your money on them. There are binaural beats that are available on YouTube and downloads on various platforms like iTunes. I don't think they do any harm. I don't have any hard evidence from myself or clients.
I do.
That they're making okay.
I do have some harm from binaural
Off you
beats.
go.
Binaural beats are based on a 1978 paper in Scientific American that if you put like a 300 hertz tone in this ear and a 310 hertz or a 290 hertz into this ear, the difference is 10 hertz, and this will force the brain of some people, it doesn't work for everyone, but it will force the brain to make 10 cycles per second. So one time, I had a guy who had used the Monroe Institute's called Hemisync, and he had done it 8 hours a day, every day for a month. and his brain got stuck in that frequency. And he was like a zombie. He could hardly think, he could hardly move. So he came and he did the 7-day alpha training. He was able to break free of that. Now, in the personal change, personal growth, transformation area, I separate things into learning techniques and do-it-to-you devices, which would include drugs. For example, if you take a drug, it's going to change your brainwaves and you'll have experiences. And so I avoid do-it-to-you technologies, including all forms of entrainment. Let me say this. If you were an ecologist, you would be very concerned about invasive species. If you get a 2-pound African frog on a Hawaiian island, pretty soon all the ground nesting birds have gone extinct. And so invasive species are a serious ecological problem. As a brain scientist, I'm concerned about invasive frequencies. The brain is a multiply co-evolved complex system of a lot of different frequencies from a lot of different generators in the brain. They all work together. And if from the outside you inject some frequency, I don't see a good result from that. I think it's better to know what it is you want to train and then use a feedback technology in order to do that. It's going to be more ecological, it's going to be more wholesome, it's going to be more sustainable.
Thank you very much. Who's got another question for us? Yes.
Okay. Do you believe that it's all in the universal design and we are just doing a role play?
Do we believe, because you shout at me?
Do you believe that we are all in the universal design, it's like a pre-design, and we are just playing a role play?
So do we believe that we're all pre-designed and that we're actually running out on a role play? Okay, shall I go first on that one? Okay. I believe that we have complete freedom to choose, but I believe that the universe is constantly giving us signs and opportunities to upgrade who we are. So the universe, we do have the capacity to be a genius, we do have the capacity to lead our absolutely best life. But what you'll notice is that if you don't learn a lesson, it keeps coming back in a different frock. It keeps showing up. So for instance, if you have abusive relationships and you do not work with your self-esteem, because your relationships, by the way, reflect your self-belief of what you're worth, and if you don't work on that, you're going to keep on attracting the same kind of people, the same kind of patterns, but as I say, they're just going to appear differently. So for me, and Dr. Hardt might have a completely different take on this, I coach people and I work myself on very much the universal wisdom of paying conscious attention. What has the universe given me today? I don't judge it as good or bad. I just look for the gift and how I can channel that into my life so it's the best life I can have. And sometimes it feels good, sometimes it doesn't. That doesn't always mean it is a good or bad event. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
It's also in the design.
Yeah, I mean, we have free will. The universe is not a judgmental, intelligent force. You know, if you do not take the lesson, if you do not take the opportunity, she really doesn't mind. She doesn't punish us. That I do believe. Dr. Hardt?
In the alpha training and the theta trainings that I lead, I typically ask people to check their beliefs at the door. We try to have the training be a belief-free zone. The famous German philosopher-scientist Johann Wolfgang von Goethe said, whenever anybody belongs to a certain narrow creed or belief, every true perception is gone. And so, like Michelle began the talk by saying, don't believe anything that we say. I say that in the trainings. Don't believe anything that I say. If I suggest you try this strategy to make alpha and it doesn't work for you, well, don't keep doing it just because you believe I know what I'm talking about. Maybe you didn't understand it. Maybe you're doing it differently than I intended. Or maybe it doesn't work for you, the way your brain is set up. And so go with what you know, or what you come to know. And beliefs are, shall we say, an add-on. After you've seen a lot of data, you might have a belief about it. But on the other hand, other data might come along, and if you ignore that data because you have a belief, that's going to limit your opportunity to learn and grow. So I try to avoid beliefs.
Thank you. You had a question, sir.
Yeah, what did you do during the 7 days training?
Okay, so what did I do in the 7-day training? So I went into a dark room about 10 foot by 10 with no windows, no clock, that's quite cold. In the mornings you get electrodes glued in your hair, which is why my hair's looking so thin. It's quite something. And then you go and sit in front of a computer which has a blacked out screen, so you're completely in the dark for most of the time. And then for 2 minutes, you are challenged to create an orchestral sound with all of your different brainwaves. So Dr. Hardt earlier spoke about the different areas of the brain producing a different sound. So by the end of the training, I was working on 12 different areas of my brain. Therefore, my brain wanted to produce this huge orchestral sound, which is alpha brainwaves. Does this make sense? So every time my one area of brain makes an alpha brainwave, a different instrument kicks off. So the brain likes feedback. So the more feedback it got, the more alpha it produced, the more alpha brainwaves it produced. Now I chose to do, because I've already told you, I'm an intensity junkie. I chose to do the back-to-back, which is 2 trainings in one. So often I would do that from 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock in the morning until midnight. It was bloody hard work. However, what you also do, by the way, is you take in traumatic memories that you may not have been able to process, and you flood them with alpha brainwaves. So once you've learned to create lots of alpha, you can then take your most traumatic memories, you flood them with alpha, and remember that Einstein said that you can't solve a problem using the same, from the same environment that you created it. Well, I'm now going into a childhood trauma, but I'm now flooding it with alpha brainwaves, which I certainly didn't have before the chamber. So what that does is it actually changes the experience. It changes, so if you imagine a set of dominoes, it's like one of the dominoes tipping over, and of course what happens? Your past and your future also are altered. Does that make sense? It's quite a hard thing to explain, for me anyway, in layman terms. But what I can tell you that my creativity as a coach, my ability to solve people's blocks and fears and help them move forward has gone through the roof. I was already pretty good, but it has definitely impacted it. Several of my clients have gone into the chamber as well, having spoken to me, seen the difference in me. And the 3 that have gone in are all captains of industry. They're all pretty senior people. And they've become much calmer. They've made much more rational decisions. They used to have bad tempers. They're much more able to stay aligned. So that's basically what I did in the chamber. Does that answer your question okay? Yeah?
And I can give a little bit more detail. When you come in the first day, you're given a tour of the facility, and you sit down at a conference table and have some orientation while the technicians measure your head carefully and put the electrodes on. It is so unobtrusive that you almost don't know that it's happening. The brain is very complex, so any meaningful brain feedback system is also going to be complex. So much of the first 3 days is learning how to learn. All learning is divided into 2 parts. The first part is learning how to learn, and then the actual learning. And so what Michelle did was what we call the premium double program, where people go into the chamber twice each day. And while the days may go from 9 a.m. until midnight, you're not in the chamber all the time. And it may take 3 hours the first day to get you oriented before you're ready to go in the chamber. When you go in the chamber, the first thing you do is take computerized mood scales. Your brain is being measured, and emotional words, one at a time, will appear on the screen. Friendly, clear thinking, sleepy, unhappy, dizzy. And you push a button to say how much you're feeling that. 0's not at all, 1's a little, 2's quite a bit, moderately, 3's quite a bit, and 4 is extremely. Computer's measuring your brainwaves while you're doing this. Then you do a series of basslines, eyes open, eyes closed with counting beeps and white noise. And then you start what we call alpha suppression, where you get the feedback. So for 2 minutes at a time, you get these sounds which vary. Each tone is adjusted 50 times a second to track the changing brainwaves. And so the first thing you do is practice turning alpha off. And there's a bathroom break, and then you practice turning it on. Then you do another mood scale to say, what did you feel like in your highest alpha? Then you go to lunch. After lunch, you come back and you do another session. At the end, you have a third mood scale, basslines, and then you leave and you go to a room where we have canopied beds and little purple Christmas lights, and there you tell your trainer the details of what happened to you. Turns out that there are three pillars that make the training effective. One is the patented ergonomic technology, which we build. Two is the patented and optimized training protocols. You couldn't come 1 day a week for 7 weeks and get anything like the results you get by coming 7 consecutive days. Imagine an airplane taking off, taxiing 100 feet and stopping, and then 2 days later or a week later taxiing another 100 feet and stopping, waiting a week. Eventually you get to the end of the runway, but this transformation we call flight hasn't happened. So you have to train intensively on consecutive days. And then the third pillar is the transformational perspective of the trainer. Because let's say you've just come out of a session and you've had all kinds of interesting and cool things happen. You want to tell somebody about this and get coaching on it. Because if you don't, ego will come in and it'll erase the memories of anomalous perceptions, which could be very helpful to you the next day. And so the trainer will not only get you to tell all the details, like if you wake up from a dream and you tell somebody about it in detail, it's so rich. If you wait 5 minutes or an hour, much of it's gone. So immediately after you come out of the chamber, you stop at the bathroom, then you go to the canopied bed room and you sit or lie in one of the canopied beds, and the other 2 or 3 or 4 people share their stories, so you get to learn from them as well. Then at the end of that, you have dinner. You go back to the conference table, and we have large monitors cut into the table, and then you can actually see your actual brainwaves. I was showing you traces of that 74-year-old woman before and after her brainwave training. So you get to look through all your brainwaves. And there's also graphs that show the numbers, because every 2 minutes when the tones shut off, at the end of an epic 2 minutes, the screen lights up and you get to see your scores. Left brain, right brain, and the interaction, the hemicoherence between them. Then when you come in the next morning, while you're getting your electrodes on, the trainer goes over those mood scales with you. Now let's say that one of the words was angry, and you put 0. Well, the computer in its wisdom knows that that's maybe not accurate. Now, there's no suggestion people are lying, but a lot of people have unconscious emotions that they don't know about. And so the trainer will say, well, now, you denied anger, but the computer gives you 5 sigmas, so that's a very high likelihood. What are you angry about? And then maybe a tear comes out of your eye, and then the trainer says, okay, what's going on? Tell the story. And so in your telling of that story, you'll come up with some forgiveness candidate. Somebody did something to you, hurt you, cheated on you, robbed you, or failed to do something they promised. And so that person goes on your forgiveness list. The mood scales are like to plow across the surface of the mind and turn up these unconscious traumas, which, as Michelle said, you can heal by flooding them with alpha. So that's kind of a process description of each day.
Thank you. Much more detail than I gave you. Okay, we've got time for one more question. Oh my goodness. Okay, if I start with you.
So, can you describe somehow what is the feeling of a normal people without a headset when you have a high alpha? If they feel something or they see something in colors, or what's the
this has been studied extensively, and there are qualities that people associate with high alpha. Feelings of flying, lightness, vast space, and bliss. Now, if you just increase your alpha 15%, you'll have life-transforming insights. If your alpha doubles or triples from where it started, you will live in a profoundly different reality. I'd like to go to, you were talking about people's, emphasizing their gifts. One time, 80% of all people have their biggest alpha at the back of the head. It's called the occipital. Well, one time I had a guy come in who had massive alpha at his frontals. Very unusual. And so I said to him, I said, you would make a great strategic planner. And he goes, that's my job. He had typecast himself into a profession in which he had natural gifts. Now, why did I say that? Well, the frontal brain is the association cortex. It's the most recently evolved part of the brain. And if you have a lot of alpha there, you can make incredibly creative associations. So you can take present data and project it into the future. And he was paid huge amounts of money for this gift that he had because he had abnormally big frontal alpha. Now, there are some brainwave feedback companies that measure your brainwaves on the first day, and they compare you to a normative database. And if you dare to differ from the norm, if you're not a C student, they will train your gifted brainwaves out of you. We don't do that.
Thank you. There was another question. Yes.
No problem. I have a very good voice. I wanted to check, after the session, when you do the 7 days training, obviously the person during that session he's trained, he get to have feelings and experiences and maybe some insights that he can use in his life. How do you make sure that when they come back to their normal lives, there's brain integration and there's sustained and first steps and things that they can integrate in their life and put it on track, so they're not just they experience something, but it's not manifesting in their reality?
Can I answer that from a layman's point of view, as somebody who's been in the lab?
Yeah.
And then I'll hand over to Dr. Hardt for the scientific side of it. For me, I was very, it's an investment of my time, and I was very clear that I wanted to get a lot out of it. So I was very clear about my intention. And remember, at the beginning of this session, I talked about the power of intention. And so once I knew what my intention was, and then every day as stuff came up, what I did was I made commitments to myself about what I was going to change. Now, it might have been something very small, but as you will know, that something very small can have a huge impact. And so I am pretty self-aware, as you expect, being a coach. So I wrote down what my commitments to self were, and then every single day I tested myself or set myself against those commitments to make sure that I saw through. By doing that, I was creating new habits, which in turn creates new brainwaves, which creates the new identity. So that's how I did it. And I found it very easy because obviously I was working in new brainwave state. It was quite hard for me to go back. But one of the things that was extraordinary, and this is what my clients are saying, was I kept on saying to myself, I don't know if it's worked. Because I like to see, if it's not got a band of angels and the royal family turning up, then I'm not sure that it's worked. But what I found was something would happen that perhaps would have triggered me before, and I didn't have the same response. And on many, many occasions, I was like, and I had to stop and go, Jesus, that's who I am now. And it was really quite amazing. And that for me was the absolute litmus test that not only had the work worked, but also that my intention had been fulfilled.
Marvelous personal story. This is a very important question. How long does it last? Now, what I was seeing when I was doing this work in universities, I did this research at Carnegie Mellon University and at the University of California in San Francisco, the Medical Center. And at one point I had a large federal grant to study anxiety and aging. It turns out that anxiety is higher in women than it is in men at every age. In both men and women, anxiety goes up with age, and in women it goes up faster. So all of my pilot data had been done with college-age males. And so we would give them personality tests before, and then on the 7th or the 8th day, we would repeat that. And the changes were so profound that, a little vignette, when I won my federal grant, I was promoted from being an assistant research psychologist to being an assistant professor in the psychiatry department. Shortly after that, the chairman decreed there would be an annual faculty retreat. And so each faculty member, I'm the youngest, newest member of the faculty, would have to spend 10 minutes talking about the research. So I'm showing slides of the MMPI profile. It's like the granddaddy of all personality tests. Every psychiatrist knows what it is. Day 1, day 7. And the changes it would measure things like paranoia, anxiety, schizophrenia, depression, hypochondriasis, the classic collection of psychopathologies. And the improvements were so dramatic that I'm only halfway through my talk, 5 minutes into my talk, and 2 senior bearded members of the department jump out of their seats. They start shouting, shaking their fists like that. And what they were afraid of, because anger is a result of unconscious fear, or fear you're not acknowledging, was that this new technology was going to disrupt their august profession of psychiatry. That's how powerful this is, that it made the psychiatrist outburst in, I was literally shouted off the stage. Academic freedom? Okay, so it's very powerful. But the question is, which you asked, how long does it last? Now, when I did the federal grant, I wrote it. Took 3 years before it was awarded. Had to learn the politics of science. But I built in a 6-month follow-up and a 12-month follow-up. And so it was done to the gold standard. It was double-blind because I knew what the hypotheses were. I couldn't train the people. So I had to hire and train technicians, glorified technicians, who could also interview people at the end. And so, of course, and the target population was women over 60, because I said anxiety goes up in women faster than it goes up in men. And so we wanted to know, does this work for older women? And it was the same array of magical benefits for the women who were from 60 up into their 80s. And their personality profiles were dramatically improved. And then we sent them away. And they said, what can we do to keep this going? And the technicians had to go, we can't tell you anything for a year. This is a double-blind study. Now, Michelle is very gifted in what skills she brought to the work in order to help it last longer. But I wanted to know, if you don't do anything, you don't tell the people anything. Like, for example, I'd be listening through a closed door, and one woman was saying, oh, this has been so wonderful. How can I keep this going? The technicians were not even allowed to say, meditate. Okay? No clues, no help. We bring them back at 6 months and retest them, and their personality profiles are further improved. It's like, how is this possible? We bring them back at 12 months, and there were still greater improvements in their personality. So now I have a problem, and it's a wonderful problem. How do I explain this? And so what I realize is, when people change their perceptions of reality and of themselves, they live in a profoundly different universe. Let's take a simple example. Let's say you're colorblind, and all your life you've only seen shades of gray, black and white. And so then maybe you have a miracle surgery, maybe you go to Lourdes, you put the sacred water in your eyes, and now you can see in colors. Well, for months, every flower, every sunset is going to be a showstopper. You go, oh my God, look at how beautiful. But that altered perception is now going to change your life. You go to the supermarket, and instead of buying a can of this and a box of that, you're drawn by the colors of the fresh fruits and vegetables, and you buy and eat a healthier diet. That changes your biochemistry because your perception had changed. Or you go to the closet to get dressed, and instead of buying colors that are geeky and weird and cause people to go, ugh, now you're color coordinated, and your circle of friends changes, grows, expands, And so this shift in perception of yourself and of reality will profoundly change you, and even without any coaching and without any of the good skills that Michelle shared with you, even a year later there will be ongoing improvements. So the question isn't how long does it last? The scientific question needs to be, well, how long is it before new benefits stop showing up? And at least out to a year they keep showing up.
Thank you. Wow. What a way to finish. And I would like to thank Dr. Hardt for coming all the way over here for you today. I'd like to thank you guys. You've been amazing, our sound crew. And you can see we're up here on social media. Would love you to join us. I post on stories and Instagram relentlessly inspiration, little golden nuggets to help you be the best you can be. Biocybernaut. They've also got the social media presence. If there's anything you want from us, please just connect with us. We're absolutely delighted to hear from you. If you do want a copy of the presentation with scientific thesis and all sorts of things that's way out of my league, just come up to the front. We'll take your details, your email, and we'll get those posted to you. So once again, thank you so much. Here's wishing you an amazing rest of the festival, and hope to see you on party night. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You also have cards there with the email address, and you can make your request by email if you wish.